What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, December 17th, 2019, 1 week away from Christmas Eve. So if you haven't gotten your Christmas shopping done, you need to get that done, especially if you're going to be sending stuff through the mail. And we've already had one case where we made an online order with the assurance it would be there for Christmas. And now we're finding out, well, there's been a bit of a supply chain problem. And, the kids aren't going to get their toys until a little bit after Christmas, but golly gee whiz, we're going to give you a discount on your next purchase from our company, which is not likely to happen. Anyway, and yes, we could have gone and should have gone a little bit sooner to get all this stuff done. But when somebody says, we'll make sure it's there for Christmas, you kind of want to take them at their word. So at this point, I'm feeling kind of like there's a lot of grinchiness out there. A lot of people are attacking Christmas. And again, living in Santa Claus, Indiana, they take Christmas here very spectacularly. They've got their Festival of Lights going on here in Christmas Lake Village, which turned out to be a huge success because the entry fee, if you will, for outside cars to come on through and admire all of the lights is some canned food for disadvantaged in this part of the state. And they had something like 1,000 cars last Saturday night, and they're expecting an even larger crowd this coming Saturday night. Anyway, it did snow this morning. It's already melted, but it was kind of interesting to see. And yeah, we're definitely getting into winter here, and it is getting cold. But for the moment, the snow has gone away, and so it's safe to drive. All right, so let's get on into it here. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and your opinions, and so forth and so on. So let's get right on into it. I'm watching the feed from the House committee, and right now they're going through this process of trying to define the rules for impeachment. And it's a study in foregone conclusion. I mean, we're hearing that Pelosi does have the votes to send the articles of impeachment on to the Senate. But they're still trying to control the rules. I mean, remember when Adam Schiff was saying the GOP could not call witnesses, the GOP could not cross-examine any of these so-called witnesses that were presented during the impeachment investigation, which turned out not to actually be witnesses to any wrongdoing, but merely political analysts with their opinion that if thus and such really did happen, that would be impeachable. And they're still trying to sell it. The polls are showing they're not really getting a lot of traction. People are getting fed up with this whole situation here. And again, I'm not the Trump fan I used to be. I'm very disappointed in him. But, okay, I am appalled at the way the Democrats have been behaving ever since Trump got elected back in 2016, where they've just been out to get him just because they don't like him. It's like the first article of impeachment is he defeated Hillary Clinton. That cannot be allowed to stand. Do you hear me? So apparently, Charles Schumer is already over there trying to lobby the Senate as to how they should be running the Senate trial. And of course, it's not Schumer's place. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tore into Schumer and the Democrats for requesting that the Senate trial involving President Trump's impeachment be run under a different set of rules. And basically, Mitch McConnell is saying, we're going to get through this really quick. We're just judge and jury to hear a trial, not rerun the entire fact-finding investigation because angry partisans rush sloppily through it. See, the Democrats in the House are now realizing they botched this. They didn't really find anything. And the public reaction to their behavior is very negative. Apparently, a lot of first-time House representatives, they're already out starting their campaign for re-election next year. They're being confronted by their constituents saying this stuff is nonsense, and it's got to go away. So Schumer wants to turn the Senate trial into a regurgitation, if you will, of everything that they have accused Trump of, but have no proof for it whatsoever. And Mitch McConnell is saying, no, we're going to run the vote through the Senate. More than likely, they're going to acquit, barring an unexpected surprise. And that will be the end of it. But the Democrats are still out there. They're already talking about finding other reasons to impeach. The House Judiciary Committee's already come out with a supplementary report accusing Trump of fraud and wire fraud and bribery, and saying this guy should be in jail for the next 20 years. They're just dogpiling on him here. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, it's interesting because back when it was Bill Clinton who was being impeached, Chuck Schumer opposed any witness testimony, but now he's demanding it in the case of the Senate trial of Trump. So when they talk about, we need to debate the rules, what they want to do is change the rules to give themselves an advantage, or at least an imagined advantage here. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court has pulled the rug out from impeachment article number 2, the obstruction of Congress. And the Supreme Court has agreed to hear 3 cases that involves the executive office refusing to cooperate with the congressional subpoenas. And the mere fact that they decided to hear the case shows the potential for resounding support by the Supreme Court of the president's claims that he need not comply, and sets the basis for yet another element of support, proving the basis that these subpoenas were a fishing expedition. The House of Representatives didn't really have anything. They're just out there saying, well, by golly, we're gonna keep on digging until we find something. So the Supreme Court is already out there saying, Trump may have been in the right to refuse these subpoenas. For one thing, it's a violation of the separation of powers doctrine. So the second article of impeachment, obstruction of Congress, is already on very shaky legs, and already the Democrats are out there saying, well, what do you expect from a Supreme Court that's loaded up with conservatives and they're all Trump supporters, and really, we shouldn't be listening to them anyway. And again, we're supposed to have 3 separate but equal, emphasis on separate branches of government. And here we have the Congress trying to basically take control of the executive branch, because if they pull this off, if they kick Trump out of office for not going along with what Congress wanted to do, then future presidents are going to be completely hamstrung. They're going to sit in that Oval Office. They're going to make a lot of speeches. They're going to get on out and, look presidential, but they'll be afraid to veto legislation lest the Congress say, oh, well, he's not working with us, impeach the guy. And the same thing here with the Supreme Court. They're already out there trying to basically discredit the Supreme Court. Of course, they've been doing that going all the way back to the Kavanaugh hearings. So, again, the House Judiciary Committee has released a 169 report in the dead of night last night, alleging Trump committed criminal acts, including bribery and wire fraud, and say that he needs to go to jail for 20 years. I mean, they are not letting go on this. They are not letting go. And it's already showing indications this is definitely going to backfire on them next year. Because you have yet another Democrat has decided to change parties over this whole situation. And again, you're getting all these first-time freshman representatives who are very concerned about being reelected next year. And they're hearing it from their constituents. Everybody's sick and tired of this circus. And so they're still out there, saying, well, we've got to set some rules by which, again, they want to change the rules to give themselves the advantage. All you need to do is look how Adam Schiff set the rules of the House impeachment inquiry where they could call all kinds of people with no direct knowledge of Trump's actions, put them up there to testify as if they knew what they were talking about, and then block all GOP efforts for cross-examination or counter witnesses. And if Schumer is able to work his will, he's going to do exactly the same thing to the Senate. So anyway, apparently the former FBI General Counsel James Baker said Monday that he felt distressed after reading the IG report laying out the significant errors and omissions in the Bureau's applications to surveil former Trump campaign aide Carter Page. Everybody's focusing on Carter Page, but we now know there were at least 4 different members of the Trump campaign that were being spied on by the FBI. And apparently Baker was interviewed on CNN and basically went even further than former FBI Director James Comey, who said, well, there's no bias or anything here. It's just sloppy work, and Comey has now backed off his claim that the FISA process was followed. He was being interviewed by Chris Wallace, and Comey said, well, yeah, I guess I was wrong to say the FISA process was followed. No, it wasn't. The whole thing was a joke from beginning to end, starting with that bogus Christopher Steele dossier. This whole thing was just made up out of thin air. Now, the latest polls are showing the majority of Americans believe it's the FBI that broke the law investigating the Trump campaign. And there's a new Rasmussen poll shows voters are favoring jail and firing for all the FBI officials who targeted Trump. The Democrats have only succeeded in making Trump into a sympathetic character. And by the way, even if the Senate ejects Trump from office, there's no law that says he can't come back and campaign again next year to run again. Frankly, the Republicans don't have anybody to run in his place. The Democrats don't have anybody. In fact, there are persistent rumors that Biden is going to step out of the presidential race because of the emerging scandal about Ukrainian corruption involving Hunter Biden. And so the Democrats don't have much of a lineup, which is why I'm convinced Hillary's going to step back on in. And we're going to have another Hillary-Trump contest, and Hillary, she's going to do whatever it takes to steal that White House this time. Just bring in the illegal immigrants, register them to vote Democratic, rig the voting machines, whatever it takes. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, this whole impeachment thing, first it was Schiff, then it was Nadler, and now it's going to Schumer. So what does that tell you about the power in this country, I mean, what do these three all have in common? They're all Zionist Jews and Democrats, socialists.
Yes.
And I mean, I'm not trying to pick on Jewish people. I mean, I grew up with a lot of Jewish people, and I have a lot of Jewish friends to this day. But, I mean, you got to call a spade once in a while, too. I mean, they're very disproportionately powerful. And I think they're making a big mistake having them be the face of this impeachment to put obstacles in the face of Trump and his populist rebellion. And I think what you saw in England, England and America, I mean, I remember back in the 80s, it was Margaret Thatcher and Reagan, and then, we always seemed to go lockstep with the trends. And I think this last election with Boris Johnson should really scare the hell out of the Democrats, because the reason Boris Johnson got elected is the working class labor voters said, we wanted Brexit, and we're going with Boris Johnson to get it. And Labor, even though they're lifelong Labor people, Labor Party members, the Labor just was an obstacle to what the people wanted. And it's the same way with Trump. The Democrats are being an obstacle to what Trump was elected to do, which was drain the swamp and make America great again. And they're making a huge tactical mistake. I've said it all along with this impeachment. And I think that they're going to pay a huge price. But at the same time, they're not going to compromise. They've already been obstinate with Trump. They can't backtrack. They're stuck.
Yes.
And it's really they're gonna pay a heavy price unless there's some kind of false flag or some kind of invented other scandal that I don't know. But I think they're really dead men walking in this election. I don't care who it is, and I don't care. I don't think they can cheat their way out of it, because you can cheat. It's like in football or boxing or whatever. They can cheat and they can fudge a little bit, but when it's an overwhelmingly, the team gets their ass kicked overwhelmingly, they can't. The refs can't pull it out even for them, and I think that's what's going to happen in this election. But there's another thing I wanted to. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, well, I mean, certainly the corporate media is on the side of the pro-impeachment people, and everything that's coming on out is being spun by the corporate media. And people who are actually watching the hearings and paying attention to what's going on, they realize this is a sham. But people who are relying on MSNBC and CNN and Fox News and the rest to tell them what to think, they're convinced that Trump needs to go. I mean, that's how completely out of control the situation is. And I would love to see next year's election in the United States go the same way that the British general election went, which was that the liberal socialists get their clocks cleaned and the House is returned to GOP control.
Well, you know, the Labour Party in Britain and the Democrat Party in America used to be for the working man. That's what the Labour Party was. Yes. The Democrats were with Roosevelt, the New Deal, and labor unions, and they turned their backs on labor. I mean, with Obama and Biden and the Clintons with NAFTA and doing away with coal and putting workers, they became the party of gay rights and feminism and abortion and all these like fringe things, and they forgot where their roots are. And Trump was smart enough to come along and like Reagan did, and get those Reagan Democrats and those working men. And the same thing happened in England. And the Democrats are going to, all they're going to be are a bunch of, women type parties. And I don't know, it's politically correct people and people like AOC. They don't have much of a future. And I don't think they can come back. That's the problem. I don't think they can come back to labor now. I think labor is just finished with them. Because they come up with these, I've been kind of active talking to a lot of Democrats, and they don't really care about labor anymore. They made the decision they'd play identity politics, and they didn't like labor anyway because we had old-fashioned ideas, and we limited their craziness, and that's what they're paying a price for that. It's the truth. It's sad.
Well,
labor
we'll see.
needs as much voice as they can get.
If we could guarantee that next year's election was going to be fair and honest and above board, and that non-citizens would not be allowed to vote, I would expect it to be a GOP sweep. Because the Democrats have definitely hoisted with their own petard over this impeachment nonsense. The problem is, we saw it in 2016, Hillary and the DNC, they literally rigged the primaries to hand the nomination to Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders was definitely much more popular, but then they came in with all these, the so-called super delegates. And then when it looked like Hillary couldn't even cheat that way, they started talking about, well, we're going to have to convince the Electoral College, to go with the popular vote, which is generally what they do, but not always. And we're seeing it again with this impeachment thing. The rules aren't really working for what the agenda wants, so let's just change the rules. That's like being in Las Vegas and demanding that blackjack now pay off on 22. And, then you wind up owning the strip. But I think most people understand, when you're talking about changing the rules to make it easier for you to win, that's just another name for cheating. And that's exactly what the Democrats are doing, and I think most Americans are smart enough to realize that.
Well, if they cheat the progressives again, they're going to have a complete civil war on their hand. I mean, it was bad enough what they did to Bernie last time. And if they do that to the progressives again, I mean, that's their wing now. I mean, they've this whole impeachment is a progressive-driven agenda item, and they're doing it to appease the hardcore left and the progressives. So I don't know. I mean, I think they've gone too far to the left, and I don't think they can come back. And which is a good thing.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Joe, stay on the line. I'm going to take you to the commercial break, and we'll be right back after this. Hello, hi. America, welcome back to our show. And over here at Republic Broadcasting, we've all been good little girls and boys this year. And so if you would, out of your own generosity, like to add something to our collective Christmas stocking, the postal address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. Now that I live in Indiana, I ought to actually drive down there one of these days. If you would like to make a credit or debit card donation, the number is 800-724-2719, extension 3 during business hours, extension 1 at all other times. All right, so we're talking with Joe in Tennessee, and we're talking about impeachment. And we're talking about how the Democrats may be shooting themselves in the foot. Or maybe they're so confident they can steal the election next year, they simply don't care what you think about them any longer. But the polls are definitely showing a very negative public reaction to this obviously ginned up attempt to undo the election of 2016, get rid of Donald Trump, and clear the decks for the re-emergence of Hillary Clinton. And so I can imagine people are getting angry. Now, I know, Joe, that you mentioned that if they kick Trump out, it could trigger a civil war. I would not like to see that, but I understand a lot of people are getting very angry. I'm understanding that there's talk of a new civil war starting over in Virginia because the Democrats have pushed too hard and too fast on the gun issue. And apparently some of the county governments in Virginia are starting to literally organize their own militias. So things are getting very, very tense out there. And the Democrats could literally rip this country apart if they keep pushing on this impeachment situation. And all because of this one bitter old lady. She is an old lady. Forget about all the plastic surgery she's had in the last couple of years. She's a bitter old lady who can't get over the fact that the American voters just didn't like her. And my concern is if she succeeds in stealing the election next year, she's going to find some way to exert her revenge on the American people. Because she's going to feel they betrayed her in 2016, and she's going to find some way to put the screws to every single American citizen, especially if you're a Republican.
Well, I really think she's finished personally, but maybe we'll see. But the thing about this impeachment is that when you railroad somebody and you try to frame somebody, it works. It works if you do it at night. It works if you do it in back rooms, but. The thing that the Democrats don't realize is this is on TV, and it's being shown live. They can't just spin it in their newsroom. They're people, yeah. They're Republicans, they're talking directly to the American people, and especially when they have such a flimsy case. So the longer this goes on, if it goes to a Senate trial, Trump has done nothing wrong. He's going to destroy their case. And it's not going to be coming through a talking head. It's going to be coming through his representatives or Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham. So they made a big mistake in trying to railroad a man for a crime he didn't commit and being done at night, like wide open for everybody. That's their big error in this. They don't seem to understand. Maybe they're just smoking their own dope and believe that Trump is this horrible anti-constitutional lunatic, whatever. But I mean, they can see Trump committing all these crimes, but Joe Biden is sitting there on video committing a crime. When he talked about his, the getting rid of the prosecutor in Ukraine, that's cut and dry right there. But
yeah, that's a quid pro quo right there. And yeah. You're right. Nobody's talking about that, certainly not in the corporate media. And it's like we're seeing all this corruption that's taking place all across the entire government, but they're trying to basically say, oh, the only real corrupt individual is President Donald Trump. And if he has committed an act of corruption, it's like child's play compared to what we've seen come out of the Bushes and the Clintons and so forth and so on. And as far as the Senate not removing Trump, well, we don't know whoever's behind all of this, what they may have on the sitting senators. Again, we don't know how many people fell into Jeffrey Epstein's honey trap and who wound up with all of that data. And again, I think this all goes back to Hillary Clinton. And the Clintons have got the juice to really call the shots for much of the government because they know where all the dead bodies are and they know how they got to be dead bodies. And so I think that's definitely something we need to keep in mind. I'm not willing to place any bets that Trump is going to be able to hang on to his office simply because, the people who are working against him, they're willing to do anything. Emphasis on anything to get him out of that Oval Office. Now, Fox News just ran this story where right now polls are showing that Trump is leading every single Democratic candidate in the race for the White House. He polls higher than Biden, polls higher than Warren, polls way higher than the others that are in that field. And so basically what they're telling us is in a country with fair elections, okay, Trump is going to win re-election. The problem is the Democrats aren't interested in fair and honest anything. They want to win at all costs.
No, they're not.
Okay, Joe, we're going to let you go here, take another break for commercials. We got another caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And, of course, our holiday bump music comes to us courtesy of Claire Rivero and her album Christmas Without Borders, which is sort of a reimagining, if you will, of Christmas music from around the world. And there is an ad on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com that will take you over to where you can listen to more samples of the music from the album. And if you are so motivated, you can actually buy and download the music there. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I wanted to tell you that was very pretty music coming into that. I like that. That was pretty cool.
That's Carol of the Bells, and that actually is one of the most popular tracks off that album.
Cool. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about impeachment today. My question is, at what point is somebody actually going to stand up and go, hey, this is all fruit of the poison tree. This investigation or all of this was illegitimate at the start of all of this.
Well, we're getting a lot of people who are hemming and hawing about it. I mean, Chris Wallace put Comey on the spot here. And the issue is right now, the deep state's only defense for what they have done is to say there was no malice intended. There's an absence of malice. We were just stupid, bumbling incompetents, which to me, that's grounds to fire them all anyway. But I think more and more people are standing up and saying, this is all fruit of the poison tree, as you put it. And I think that's why the polls are shifting so dramatically against the impeachment, against Democrats in general.
There was another thing that I wanted to mention. Joe, he said something that was kind of where I wanted to go with this. But after Brexit, or that last with election, I think it was this week or last week, with Boris, is that his name? Johnson? I think that's
yes.
I forget who they are. Yes. A lot of people in England are going around, saying, hey, the only thing that could stop this is martial law. Well, I look at the Labor Party over there, and I look at the Democrat Party here in the United States. That is one of the major final cards that they could pull here.
Yes.
To stop. I mean, I know they want civil unrest and they want a civil war in this country anyway, but I do feel like we're not out of the woods yet here. I do feel like I feel like we are in the season of false flags. We are in the season of them trying to pull something like that. And I just want people to be diligent and keep their eyes open. If you see something, hey, try to catch it on your phone, or, and send it in to you, or send it into whatever talk radio they can. Just to put the spotlight on, saying, hey, see, here's another reason, or, here's the thing, what's really going on. But I don't know how you feel on that. Like, I don't know if you feel we're in the season of false flags, or that could possibly be one of the last cards that they could pull.
Well, I'm looking at what happened in 2016 when Hillary lost, and all of her supporters just went rioting in the streets and causing a lot of damage, and it didn't help their public image to do that. And as I said earlier in the program, I don't want to see a civil war come to this country. Okay, but on the other hand, I think a civil war would be a bad idea for the Democrats because it's mostly us conservatives who have military training and all the weapons, and the liberals are still trying to figure out which bathroom to use. So we have the advantage.
Absolutely, I agree with you. That's all I wanted. Oh, there was the other thing that I wanted to say was a couple weeks ago. Well, as this impeachment stuff started, there's been a couple Democrats that have approached Senator or the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, and was trying to convince him not to have a trial because we're having the trial in the House. See, we proved this. We proved Trump to be, have high crimes and misdemeanors here, although they haven't. But they had went to Mitch McConnell trying not to have a trial in the Senate. So I mean, this following the rules, they ain't following the rules, and this is why I call this illegitimate. I mean
it's reached the point where the FISA court itself is slamming the FBI for their behavior in the Carter Page visa application. And now they're saying they're worried about other warrants that were sought by the Obama administration. And so the FISA court is starting to go back and take a look at all of that paperwork themselves to see if there are more irregularities. And I think they're definitely going to find it.
Oh, absolutely. And I've always said this, the buck stops with Obama, but I don't know if they're really going to go that high up. I mean, I really believe he's the one that gave the orders out.
I think that Obama was just doing what Hillary told him to do. I mean, have you seen his latest thing? He's out there saying that women are just naturally superior leaders and men just ought to get out of their way and let them run the country. Well, if that isn't telegraphing the fact that Hillary's going to step into this contest, I don't know what will.
I agree with that. Well, Mr. Mike, you have a great and awesome day and stay warm and give Miss Claire the best.
I certainly will. Thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to Bruce in Texas. Aloha, Bruce. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Mike. I mean, Bruce. Yeah, Mike. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Hello?
I'm Mike.
Yeah.
All right, better be. I'm wearing his underwear.
Did you ever get those Arctic boots I suggested?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did, and they're almost too warm to use at this particular part of the season, but I'm sure I will be using them. Claire, as a Christmas gift to me, has ordered me some of these UGG boots that she's in love with, and we're going to get all wrapped up and warm and roasty toasty, and thankfully energy prices in this part of the country are very low, so we're able to keep the house reasonably warm, not Hawaii tropic warm, but we're able to keep it warm and not have to fret about it too much.
All right, good. Yeah, those things are good. They're not too beautiful, but they're good in case you have to do something outside, Oh,
I don't worry about beautiful. I really don't, especially in the dead of winter. Functionality, and so many people, our listeners around this part of the country, have been very generous sending us winter clothing. And somebody sent us these two very, very heavy jackets, and we almost started wearing those earlier today, because the jackets we have been using just aren't quite keeping the wind chill out.
Okay, that was very beautiful music that you played there from Claire's album.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And maybe some antifreeze would help, like some eggnog.
Yeah, we're going to be doing that definitely on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, and we're definitely going to clean out the radiators.
Okay,
so
good.
To speak.
All right, so I can move on. Let the next caller come in. I got this from Russia Insider, which is I guess sourced from Checkpoint Asia. U.S. Senate to consider bill designating Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. Have you heard of that one?
Yeah, that came out last week, and it's just another way of trying to provoke Putin to justify additional sanctions. And, my response to that is, look who's talking. I mean, we're talking about the U.S. government, which we now know was training and supporting Al-Qaeda, ISIS and who knows who all else in the jihadi community, and they're out there pointing fingers and saying, no, 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 it's Russia that is a state sponsor of terror, because we're sponsoring freedom fighters here, and it really is a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, have you heard of the Moriarties? I think they're based somewhere on Houston. They were in Libya during the overthrow. During the Hillary Clinton Obama NATO overthrow. Yeah. And he made mention that for people who don't know, they were running an oil services company there, and they had a very good experience in Libya up until the point of the overthrow.
Yes.
And he said that Daesh was NATO sponsored.
Yes.
And they were the ones that were really the bad guys. And actually, someone who poked his nose into the alternative media, he pointed him out as a real bad guy, as a point guy from the State Department. I don't know if you want me to bring up his name. He doesn't. He just wrote a few articles, but I noticed that he was trying to poke his way into the alt media, like they do. But state-sponsored terrorism, I mean, that's the biggest joke I've heard. I mean, it's just that they're mad because Russia's blocking ISIS in Syria. They launched warplanes when Israel was going to bomb targets in Syria, and so Israel had to turn around. And of course, the issue with the Ukraine and Crimea and all that. But I just wanted to bring up that topic just to see if you heard of it or not.
Oh, yeah, I heard of it. We talked about it last week. And again, it's complete and utter nonsense for the United States, to be pointing fingers at anybody else. What's that old saying? People who live in glass houses shouldn't be throwing stones, or let he who is without sin cast the first stone, or whatever metaphor you wish to use. The United States does not have the moral authority to go around saying that this or that other country is a state sponsor of terror after everything that the U.S. government has been exposed as doing.
Yeah, well, remember how they used to say peace on earth, goodwill to men. Whatever happened to all that,
I don't know, but we're trying to bring it back this holiday season here, because we could certainly use that peace on earth. And there is a dearth of goodwill, unfortunately, in the major cities and the democratic centers in this country. Now, again, around this part of Indiana, people are very pleasant. They're very helpful. They're very friendly. And I may not be enjoying the winter so much, but I'm definitely enjoying the people. And along with the wildlife, I'm having fun with my cameras.
Great. Okay. Well, it's nice talking to you, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go, and hopefully you'll have a Merry Christmas or a Happy Hanukkah or a Happy Kwanzaa or whatever else is out there. Okay, the phone lines are now open, 800-313-9443. Getting on back to our domestic political situation, former CIA officer and counterintelligence expert Kevin Shipp is saying that former Obama administration Attorney General Eric Holder gave a big deep state panic signal when he wrote in an op-ed last week in the Washington Post trashing the current Attorney General William Barr and his top prosecutor John Durham. And we're already starting to see William Barr is sort of backing away from Horowitz's report and saying, I'm not sure I agree with it. And Durham appears to be trying to do a serious job, a criminal investigation into the start of this whole Russiagate nonsense, which we now know was a complete fiction. They started with that Christopher Steele dossier that was all bought and paid for by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. It was made up out of thin air. And then they leak it to the media, and they leak it and say, oh, look what Trump was caught doing over there in Moscow. We've got to do something. He's obviously a Russian pawn. And have you noticed that's something the Democrats fall back on? Anybody who doesn't agree with them, you're obviously a Russian asset. You're working for Vladimir Putin if you don't agree with us. Well, I don't agree with the liberal Democrats, but I have yet to get a check from Vladimir Putin, just so that we're clear on that one. So anyway, this former CIA officer, Kevin Shipp, is out there saying that he's reading the situation that the deep state is clearly running scared. And I imagine the fear is predicated on a very simple fact. If anybody comes out with any indictments against any of these FBI agents or CIA agents or NSA or whoever, the first one to cut a deal is going to get, you know, the best treatment by the prosecutors. And so everybody else is saying, who around me might break ranks? And so right now, they're all dependent on everybody marching in lockstep and sticking to the official story. But the official story is starting to come apart. So they got to be getting very, very nervous. Apparently, yet another loser from 2016, Carly Fiorina, is out there saying it's vital that Trump be impeached. She's not exactly saying why. Now, Carly Fiorina rose to fame as CEO of Hewlett-Packard and oversaw its transition from one of the companies producing the best equipment you could get into value-engineered junk. And we actually, when we started our animation shop, because of my previous positive experience with Hewlett-Packard equipment, we invested in a lot of HP equipment, and it was all junk. We had these CD-ROM burners that were good for maybe 2 weeks. That's how bad it was, because they were being made in Hungary, which is not exactly known as a center of technological development. So then she left Hewlett-Packard and she got into politics, and she ran for president in 2016 and got seriously, seriously trounced. All right, over at Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton is out there saying that this IG report shows that President Trump is the crime victim. And Tom Fitton is out there saying this vicious impeachment assault on our republic can be stopped. Judicial Watch is also pushing forward on the Awan Brothers House IT scandal. Remember the other day when the Department of Justice said, oh, we can't give you the documents that you requested. We've had a systems failure, and all of that stuff is gone. And we've heard that one before, back when the Chinagate scandal broke during the first Clinton term in office. And Congress was trying to investigate, and the White House said, oh, our email server broke down and we weren't doing backups. In the good old days, you'd say, the dog ate the file, or the dog ate my homework. Today, it's, oh, the computers broke down. And apparently, a court date has been set on the Clinton emails. And Hillary is now out there trying to get the courts to basically seal up all of the documentation surrounding the period of time when she deleted all of those emails from her server. Anyway, it turns out Burisma, the natural gas company that has, well, we're going to take another break for commercials. More about Burisma after we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. So we're talking about Burisma, which is this Ukrainian natural gas company, corrupt all over the place. It's caught up with Hunter Biden, and Joe Biden is out there trying to defend his son, saying, I know his character. He would never do anything wrong, which I'm sure is going to result in a great deal of laughter and ridicule. But apparently, Burisma also helped the Clinton campaign prior to the 2016 election. Apparently, they donated around $10 million under the table. It was all done in cash so that there wouldn't be a wire transfer record. So that's all starting to come on out. All right, so let's take a little side trip over here to Harvey Weinstein. And, you know, he went to court last week in this baggy suit and using a walker. And the judge even made a comment, said, your medical frailty is not going to cut you any slack with me. Then they went along with this deal where Weinstein and his associates settled. The insurance companies got stuck with paying the settlement, Weinstein and his associates don't have to admit wrongdoing. And miracle of miracles, I guess the little angel came down with the wand, hit him on the head, clang, because the very next day, he was spotted in a New York department store, ambling through the aisles without any assistance whatsoever, his family in tow. Now, in a new interview, Harvey is out there trying to regain his fame and his influence in Hollywood. I don't think that's going to happen, but he's out there trying. And Harvey is insisting he deserves credit for helping women. He said, I made more movies directed by women and about women than any other filmmaker. He's out there trying to build pity for his tarnished legacy. All right, a little bit of news of concern. Paul Manafort, who is 70 years old, is in the hospital for what's being described as a cardiac event on the eve of his New York court date. Now, Paul's former deputy gets just 45 days and a week in jail after taking a plea deal. But apparently, Manafort was supposed to appear in court tomorrow, and the hearing's going to go on without him. But apparently, he's been recovering since Thursday, according to ABC. He's being guarded by prison officials. Gee, I wonder if he's going to hang himself the way Jeffrey Epstein did. All righty, let's get back to the Afghanistan papers here. And another article about that. The Afghanistan papers prove the U.S. invasion was built on lies, deceit, and confusion. And frankly, tell me any war the United States has been involved in where there wasn't lies and deceit and confusion to trick the American people into going along with it. It's just never happened. Truth is always the first casualty of war. Oh, and we've got to take a break for station identification. More about Afghanistan when we come back after these few words from our sponsors. So stay tuned. We've got lots to talk about. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we were starting in on the Afghanistan papers. And kudos to the Washington Post for getting those out there. Apparently, the Washington Post actually had to go to court to get some of this information out there. And it's being called this generation's version of the Pentagon Papers. I've been trying to figure out why we're not seeing the popular reaction to the Afghanistan papers that we saw to the Pentagon papers. And I think it's basically because of two things. First of all, in the case of the Afghanistan papers, the American people are now aware that our government routinely, constantly lies us into wars. We've been through that whole situation with Saddam's nuclear weapons and Assad's sarin gas and the rest of it. And the other point, of course, is that when the Pentagon papers came on out, there was still an active military draft. And people were very concerned that their kids could literally be stolen from them and dumped into a war that the Pentagon and the administration knew was unwinnable. So they were just grabbing these kids and dropping them into a meat grinder so nobody had to stand up and be embarrassed by saying, I think we've lost this one, even though we lost it. Now, I've noticed in all the news coverage of the Afghanistan papers, they're saying this is the longest war in U.S. history. Technically, no. Korea is, because technically the Korean War never ended. There's a ceasefire, and it's been sitting there ever since. So we've been in Afghanistan, shooting up a bunch of real estate, getting our kids shot up, spending $1 trillion, trillions more expected to be spent, for 18 years. But we've been in a technical state of frozen war with North Korea for close to 60 years. So it's a little bit of history that some of these prostitutes and correspondents seem unaware of. But again, we're seeing exactly the same thing. The military and civilian leadership know this war is unwinnable, but nobody wants to stand up and say this war cannot be won. And so they just keep on going. They pour your money and your kids all over Afghanistan, and it's a tough nut to crack. There's a reason it is called the graveyard of empires. Great Britain found out about that. So did the Soviet Union. In fact, the last military commander to conquer all of Afghanistan was Alexander the Great, and he only held on to it for 3 years. It's a very, very tough place. And again, how many more times are you going to have to be lied to at the loss of your tax money and the life and limb of your children before you're ready to stand up and say to this government, no more lies. Fire the liars. If you can't be truthful with me, you are no longer the legitimate government of this country. And there's a foundation for that, because nowhere in the Constitution is the government authorized to use disinformation on the American people. It's not in there. And the 10th Amendment prohibits the government from simply saying, well, we need to lie to the American people about, the Lusitania, and so we're going to go ahead and do that. Every time the government lies, they're acting illegally and unconstitutionally, and they delegitimize themselves. At this point, because of all these lies, of which the Afghanistan papers are only the most recent, we don't have a legitimate government in this country. We have a criminal enterprise that has usurped power and authority for their own benefit here. All right, Tucker Carlson has now picked up the story for his show on the new evidence showing that Syria's Assad was falsely blamed for the 2018 chemical attack in Douma. And as you're probably already aware, there have now been 2 whistleblowers who've come forward, plus some other documentary evidence. And it turns out that the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons apparently was subjected to a huge amount of pressure from the U.S. government or the British government or NATO or CIA. We don't really know. Maybe the head of OPCW was down on Jeff Epstein's island. We don't really know, except that we've now had 20 of the people who worked for OPCW on this project in Syria have now broken ranks and said, no, what we reported and concluded was that Assad had nothing to do with this. And yet the final report that was sent to the government and the final report that was fed to you by the corporate media was, oh yes, Assad did it. Absolutely, Assad gassed his own people, women and children. It was a horrible, horrible thing, without explaining why Assad would do something that's stupid, because it never really made sense. If Assad was going to use chemical weapons, and remember, he'd already surrendered them all in this deal that Putin negotiated, Assad was going to use chemical weapons. Why not use them on the enemy? The only reason women and children were being targeted was for the emotional value, the shock value. Oh, well, we feel so sorry for those women and children. We have to get that evil Assad. You guys got suckered. You got played. You ought to be very, very angry that the government treats you like idiots and fools all the time. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network, and we're going to go to the phones to Tom in Florida. And Tom, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good day to you, Michael. Aloha. What's on my mind is, first off, on the news today, they were talking about Hunter Biden sleeping with 3 different women over the last year and a half. He's married to a lady, Cohen. She's having a baby. The other one in Arkansas just had a baby a year ago, and they say he was sleeping with his brother's wife. You heard about it after the brother had passed away, he was sleeping with her? You mentioned that on the news today?
I missed that one.
With 3 women. Yes, he was supposedly had an affair with the brother's wife. Now, if Joe Biden is the nominee for the Demon Rats, Trump is going to tear them up. I mean, literally, and they also had on the news today, Michael, that Donald Trump has got 5 times the money that the Democrats are pulling in. 5 times the money that the Democrats are spending. He's going to have almost $3 billion, they say, by the time the election comes around. Yeah. So what's going to happen with that kind of money, I told you in the past, I know he's got one good network out there, like I said, it reports every hour and the hour about immigration. With that kind of money these people are going to start raising, they need to get a hold of one of these alphabet networks like ABC, NBC, or CBS, wrestle the power away from one of those networks and turn it to totally conservative. Because all of these networks for the last 50, 60 years have been nothing but left-wing, Kabbalah, deep state, whatever you want to call it. You know, Michael, this is not even a deep state or a swamp. This is a giant polluted lake.
Yes.
This whole thing, what's going on with this impeachment, is a big, giant polluted lake, the size of Lake Okeechobee or Lake.
Tom, to be a little more accurate, it's a septic tank, and the really big chunks float to the top.
Okay, I'll go along with that, Michael.
Okay.
I'll get one. But here's what I want to bring out too. Okay, you know me, Michael. I call your show, and I like to spew the truth about immigration. Again today, Michael, did you see the case out west with the Chinese lady who got busted and they slapped her on the wrist?
Yeah.
You saw what happened, right? She's got to pay $2 million.
Yeah.
She's got to pay $2 million in California. She had over 17,000 Chinese nationals came here dropping babies, and the babies are becoming senior citizens, but they're going to deport the mothers back. What is that all about? You're bringing in all these Chinese now, dropping babies like sledgehammer on this country, and they're going to take the mothers back to China, but the babies stay here? What is that all about?
Well, I'm not really sure because, you know, when the illegal immigrants from like Mexico, Central America come across the border and they squirt out a child, the child is given citizenship, and the Bleeding Heart liberals are saying, well, you can't separate the parents from the baby, forgetting that this was a conscious decision to find a way to violate our immigration laws by these immigrants. Now, I don't know why they're being selective in sending the Chinese mothers back to China, except, of course, that relations with China are very, very strained right now. But, you know, they're kind of stuck because the way the laws are written right now, anybody born in this country is automatically presumed to be a citizen. And unfortunately, that is being exploited by these illegal immigrants. And I think the law really needs to be changed, saying that anybody who's born in this country of legal citizens becomes a citizen themselves. That, to me, would make a lot more sense than this, you know, this blanket, everybody born in this country gets to be a citizen regardless of the status of their parents.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, Michael, also, One American News reported on this today that these Chinese are coming here because of the Chinese-led government. They want these women to come here because they want their babies to actually be like spying on our government and stuff. And that's what I saw in the news. I can't make this up. I'm not making this up. That these babies, eventually, when they get high school and college, they're going to turn them out to be like spies for China. I'm like, what? What am I watching here? But it was reported, like I said, One American News reports about immigration every hour in the hour. And,
yes.
And they're telling you basically these babies are going to end up potentially being spies. Like we don't have enough spies.
I have a little problem with that one because you're talking about these Chinese babies who are being raised presumably by foster parents in this country, and they're not going to be subjected to the indoctrination that one would expect would be necessary to turn somebody against the country where they happen to be living. So that last part, the doubt-o-meter is kind of twitching on that one.
Well, you know, Michael, I have to kind of agree with you on that because I felt the same way. I'm like, wait a minute, but I was thinking, you know, hey, somebody must know this is what's going to happen in the future here because this is being reported. But, you know, getting back to what's really going on also, Michael, and you and me totally agree on this and all your callers. The biggest scam they ever tried to pull in this country was this crap that Bush tried to put with Common Core. Common Core is dumbing down these kids, this is all about dumbing down society. Who's kidding who here? You have to be an imbecile not to see what Common Core is trying to do here. And you got a guy like Jeb Bush wanted to become president, where he wanted to make it where basically Spanish was going to be the predominant language of the country. He could care less. I mean, this is all insane. And, you know, these people are coming here for what? For a better life because they'll never have a car, but all these Democrats are screaming, oh, global warming, there's too much fossil fuel. So what are you going to put all these cars, all these people that never had a car and or never had all the luxuries they had in their own countries, they're going to all come here and they're all going to demand everything the best they can get. In the meantime, they're taking your jobs away from you. I mean, it's just insanity. The demon rats are getting away with the narrative of nothing but filthy lie after filthy lie after filthy lie. That's all this is about. Who can lie more? And the demon rats are looking, they're pretty good. Like, they're the best liars. Nobody can top them. And Nancy Pelosi, Michael, 79 years old. And according to a report I saw, she spent already $700,000 on her plastic surgery on her face and her body.
Well, I
saw that
looking at her face, I'd say that she got cheated.
I would have to totally agree. I would totally agree. She's starting to look more and more like Nadler, Jerry Nadler. But, or Nadler's looking like her. I can't remember. Fat Jerry's starting to look like Pelosi. But yeah, Michael, another thing you were talking about, speaking of Epstein and the Lolita Express, I'm still wondering why the ball hasn't dropped on this detective that has supposedly this information, and why isn't that not coming out? And who was actually on that plane? Because that plane, the logs on that plane was pretty much documented what senators or congressmen and all that were flying back and forth to that island. And I'd like to know, I would love to see who's on that list. That would be totally amazing to see who really was going down there all this time, breaking the law. I mean, you know, but Michael, that's another thing I like to ask you on your expertise on this. If this guy Epstein and the FBI and all these people know that this guy's got all these underage girls on this island, why aren't the parents being arrested, number one? What's going on with our State Department? Why isn't the government arrested people for having a... Look, if you're an underage girl, 15, 14 years old, and you're on the island, your parents don't give a damn where you're at? Are you kidding me? And the government's supposed to have moral...
Hang on a second. My understanding is that in a lot of cases, these young girls told their parents that they were going on a trip with some other girls. They were going to go out west. They were going to visit the Grand Canyon. It's not like they walked up to their parents and said, hey, Mom, I'm heading down to Jeff Epstein's little pedo island in the Caribbean. And so... the parents probably should have been paying a little closer attention to what was going on. But in this day and age, when both parents have to work, it can be a little bit tricky. But my understanding is that most of these girls simply misrepresented to their parents and guardians where they were going and what they were doing.
I suppose, Michael, you know, that's perplexing to me because, you know, when you're 14 years old, you're supposed to, I mean, you're a father and a mother, if they love their daughter, is not going to let a 14-year-old girl go out of their sight anywhere for more than a day. I mean, that's total disgusting to me. And then you're going to find out your daughter's on a sex island at 14 years old down in there in the Caribbean somewhere. Come on. To me, that's like I said, if they can prove that these parents are being negligent against their children, they should be arrested. And you know, speaking of that, Michael, you know, I called in yesterday, another show, on Bill Cosby. Would he pay $50 million to get out of his situation right now? Like Weinstein?
Well, I don't think
he's got a lot of money.
He's got a lot of money, but he doesn't apparently have a good lawyer, and he hasn't shown any remorse, which is why, you know, he's in prison for what he did. And again, Bill Cosby probably didn't have the connections to the political structure and the intelligence community that Jeff Epstein clearly had.
Well, yeah, Michael, but you know, a lot of people in the entertainment industry were calling him an Uncle Tom. They used to call Bill Cosby the Uncle Tom because he was always saying the black kids don't have a father in their household, and he would lecture them about how there's no father in their structure or whatever he would say about them, and they'd all team up on him and call him Uncle Tom and all that. And, you know, Cosby is pointing out things, and they hated him. The media hated Bill Cosby. They didn't care about Bill Cosby. They really didn't. A lot of people in the media did not like Bill Cosby, so maybe you're right. He didn't have the right representation. I don't know. But if Weinstein walks out of this is going to be, I think that's going to be an earthquake in itself. Because I think
he's already walked out of it. You know, he and his associates, the insurance companies are going to pay the civil settlement. Weinstein does not have to admit that he did anything wrong. He's already out there, you know, at the department stores in New York doing his Hanukkah shopping and, you know, doing interviews to try and repair his image. He's going to get away scot-free from all of this. And yes, Bill Cosby is going to stay in jail, partly because he refuses to show any remorse or regret for what he did, which was a bad move. We knew that was going to get him into trouble. And the court won't even allow him to file an appeal on his case because of his attitude issues. And it's a shame because he really is a brilliant man. when I was much younger. I loved his albums, and I was a huge fan when he was doing his comedy routines, when he was doing I Spy, the original.
Right.
But,
Robert Cole.
it definitely, yeah, with Robert Cole. Yeah, and he definitely, he behaved in a manner that probably he thought he could get away with because he's this big star and celebrity. And I've seen that kind of attitude on display when I worked in Hollywood. But he got caught, and he didn't have the juice to get out of that mess all by himself.
Yep. Okay, Mike. Well, I do have to say one thing, if I can. This Brexit stuff, I'm already hearing right now that Italy and Austria are definitely looking like they're going to be out of the EU within the next 6 months. It looks like Italy, and then once that happens, I believe France might even go once they get rid of Marcon. Did you see the traffic jam they had in France, Michael?
Yes, it is a mess over there in France. Germany's been talking about leaving the EU because right now, with Britain leaving the EU, the entire economic burden of propping up the EU is now going to fall on the German people. And coupled with that's right. All the damage to their society from the open borders agenda, they've pretty much had it with the EU, which is why the globalists are rushing as fast as they can to get a new union formed in this hemisphere, involving Mexico, Canada, and the United States. And then they're going to try the same experiment all over again in the hope that, if they just keep retrying the same formula over and over again, that, eventually it'll work on out and we'll all just settle down and be citizens of the global planet. Not going to happen. They botched it in Europe. It's not going to work here. Anyway, Tom, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. And we'll be right back with more news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here and checking the email. I've got an email reminding me that we're actually coming up on the 70th year of being a combatant in the Korean War, because the United States involvement in the war began on June 27th, 1950, when the Truman administration officially adopted UN Resolution 83 and committed U.S. military forces to defend South Korea. And of course, it basically just ground down until finally there was a ceasefire, which has remained in place from that day to this. So technically, that's America's longest running war, coming up on 70 years. Another piece of email is out there saying that Cosby was low-hanging fruit, and he was basically used as an example of law enforcement actually doing its job going after harassment cases. And because Cosby didn't have the political connections that a Harvey Weinstein would, they basically threw him in the hoosegow. Getting on back to the international news here, President Bashar al-Assad of Syria has explained in an interview with Chinese broadcaster Phoenix Television that two goals must be achieved in order to make American military forces finally withdraw from the country, where they have been stationed without the government's authorization or UN mandate. It's important to keep that in mind. The U.S. forces that are in Syria are there just on the say-so of Washington, D.C. Syria's government doesn't want them there. The United Nations has not authorized them to be inside Syria, but they're inside Syria and apparently, stealing oil, selling that off. So Assad wants them to go, and he's saying that there's two things that Syria is going to be working on. First of all the terrorist groups operating in Syrian territory must be eradicated, because it is the presence of the terrorist groups currently being used by the U.S. government as a pretext to keep its forces present in the Arab Republic. Of course, if they get rid of all the terrorists, the U.S. government will just flip on back and say, well, Assad is gassing his own people. He's an evil tyrant. He tap dances barefoot on shag carpeting. He passes wind in elevators. He's a bad person, and we have to get rid of him. The second step is basically convincing Washington's allies within the Middle East to unite their forces with the Syrian government instead of foreign forces. This is obviously aimed at the Kurds. And he says these groups must be persuaded, particularly through dialogue, that is in all of our interests in Syria. They embrace the homeland and join the Syrian state's efforts to liberate all of its territories. So from the point of view of Assad, and it looks like a significant part of the Syrian people, the United States forces are an occupying power, the way you see Israel occupying Palestine. Same exact thing here. Okay, story is just coming on out here, and was originally posted, an activist post. It turns out over in Iraq, the fact that the U.S. was committing war crimes was kind of an open secret. And Navy SEALs say they saw some shocking things where other SEALs killed children with sniper rifles, spraying civilian neighborhoods with machine gun fire and everything. And some of the SEALs went to their commanding officer to say, hey, this is a little outside the rules of engagement. And not only did the commander tell them not to report the crimes, he said that talking about the war crimes would jeopardize their careers. War crimes are meant to be seen, but not heard about. I'm looking at the Fox News feed, and apparently liberal Hollywood is back on the warpath against Donald Trump, where De Niro is out there saying that if his children acted like Trump's children, he would disown them. Trump is worse than any character he's ever played. Man, I used to have so much respect for that guy. Now, over in Turkey, in response to the U.S. Senate's recognition of the Armenian genocide in the Ottoman Empire back in 1915, the Turkish parliament is considering a resolution recognizing the genocide of Native Americans during the American colonization. And so Erdogan is basically out there saying, if we're going to be talking about past sins, let's talk about them all. You know, let's talk about Sand Creek. Let's talk about Wounded Knee. So it's time for the Native Americans to stand up and say, yeah, you guys were very rude to us. All right, we've been talking about some of the new high-tech weapons that Russia has developed, and I've been talking, I think, for more than a year now about these hypersonic, maneuverable re-entry vehicles that are traveling very fast, and they're corkscrewing, bouncing up and down, dipsy doodle, side to side, to make a simple ballistic intercept impossible. And now they're going into the field. The 1st Regiment equipped with the Avangard system will assume combat duty by year end. And apparently it's being deployed at the Domborovskaya Rocket Division. Even more telling is Russia is apparently looking at adapting the Avangard's hypersonic warhead to the Sarmat missile, which is an ICBM with a range of 18,000 kilometers. Got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Vladimir Putin has come on out with a warning to Americans that if you bring back nuclear missiles to Europe, I'll park mine in the Atlantic. In other words, we're at the doorstep of a new Cuban Missile Crisis, although in this case, Cuba may not be involved in it. But you need to understand, Russia has started putting into service their latest generation SSBN ballistic missile submarine called the Bore. It is very stealthy compared to earlier Russian submarines, and it carries 72 nuclear warheads that basically can cause a lot of damage. And so that is essentially what Putin is saying, is that he's going to start putting these submarines out on patrol. And let's see. He's going to put these submarines out on patrol, and the U.S. won't know where they are. So this thing is getting really, really seriously dangerous here. And let's see. Just give me a second here, because it looks like somebody is trying to mess around with my server. And okay, I got you. So we'll just drop them in the firewall file. Alrighty, so getting on back here. So basically what Putin is saying, that if the United States insists on putting intermediate range nuclear capable missiles in Europe aimed at Russia, this is, again, it's a repeat of what led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Putin is saying they'll just start deploying these Bore submarines into the Atlantic, and these are very stealthy. It is questionable whether the U.S. could find them. I mean, they shut down the SOSUS warning system when the Soviet Union fell apart. I think some oceanographic institutions are using what's left of the system to track whales. It would take a while to get the Surtas boats back out there, and even so, it is questionable whether they would be able to detect this submarine. Now, the earlier Soviet SSBNs, like the Deltas and the Typhoons, they were noisy. Just like the first Chinese submarines. They were very noisy. You could hear them coming a mile away. In fact, there used to be a joke that the Chinese SSBN could be idling in the harbor in China, and you could go down to the beach in Hawaii, and hear it coming through the water. But the Bore is a very, very sophisticated piece of hardware. And again, coupled with these new maneuverable warheads, that is a mess. All right, let's talk about what's going on over in Israel, because Netanyahu is maneuvering to try and hang on to his job as prime minister. For one thing, he has promised that he's going to give up all of his ministerial duties by the end of the year. And what that means is, in addition to being the prime minister, Netanyahu is also the minister for various departments within the government. It's like he was trying to run the whole thing for himself. And he's going to give that all up to focus on being the prime minister, to focus on this deal to annex the Jordan Valley, which is going to make him immensely popular. So he's struggling. He didn't win the election, but he thinks he can maneuver his way into staying as prime minister, which means he doesn't have to face those indictments for bribery and corruption that hang over his head. Now, the Likud party has expelled around 100 of its own members that are objecting to the policies of Netanyahu. In other words, the purge is on. Likud party is going to be basically Netanyahu's way or the highway. Benny, Benny, Uber, Alice, and so forth and so on here. Ireland is urging the European Union to basically confront Israel's plans to annex the Jordan Valley. Of course, it's very, very illegal for Israel to do that. You know, annexation is a word they put on it to make it look like a gigantic land theft is somehow legal, or to make it look like it was illegal. It's okay when Israel annexes the West Bank and builds illegal settlements, but by golly, those Russians, when they annexed Crimea, that was a crime. Actually, that's not what happened. We've explained many times before. The Crimeans voted in a referendum to leave Ukraine following the ouster of Yushchenko and the installation of puppet ruler Poroshenko with that junta, as it were. So Ireland is out there saying that in order to promote and protect the capacity to negotiate and deliver a two-state solution, that this plan to annex the Jordan Valley has to be stopped. Now, what we're hearing from one of Netanyahu's rivals, who also wants leadership of the Likud party, is Gideon Sa'ar. And he's saying, yes, that the two-state solution is an illusion. Don't even think about it anymore. And it says the current boundaries of the state of Israel are between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. Now, it's not as large as Eretz Israel, which goes from the Nile to the Euphrates, but that's basically the attitude. He's out there declaring by imperial edict that Palestine just does not exist anymore, and Israel is one contiguous country from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. So I imagine the Palestinians are very upset about that. Then we have the fallout from Donald Trump just arbitrarily with executive order declaring that Jewishness is a nationality. And there's absolutely no foundation for that whatsoever. But what Trump is trying to do is basically invoke Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits any discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. Now, since the Civil Rights Act does not include religion. Trump basically said, we're going to declare Jewishness is a nationality, and therefore they are now covered by the Civil Rights Act. There's only one thing, okay? We're not discriminating against Israel because of their race, color, or national origin. We're basically protesting against Israel over its behavior. That's the issue here. It's not the fact that they're Jewish. It's not the fact that they celebrate Hanukkah. It's got nothing to do with it. It has to do with holding the world record for being in defiance of more UN resolutions than any other country. It has to do with this, decades-long occupation of land they don't actually own. It has to do with their attempted declaration of sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And Trump really, under international law, does not have the authority to sanction and reinforce any of that. And the United Nations has now asked Israel to get out of the Golan. They don't have any business there. And so that's what the issue here is behind BDS and Palestinian rights. It has nothing to do with the fact that these people are Jewish or Israeli or how they dress or what they eat or how they worship. It's how they behave toward other countries around them that is the issue. And there is nothing in the Civil Rights Act that says we cannot discriminate against a nation that behaves in such a barbaric fashion. And, Trump, when he does stuff like this, when he moves the embassy to Jerusalem, when he says, yeah, it's okay for Israel to take over the Golan Heights, it's okay for Israel to build illegal settlements on stolen Palestinian lands, it's okay for Israel to take the Jordan Valley. I mean, he's basically diminishing himself in the eyes of most Americans, because most Americans understand what's going on over there in Israel and Palestine. And I think they're probably just as appalled as I am that Trump just caters to whatever Israel wants. Upon what meat doth this our Israel feed, that it has grown so great? Who knows? Maybe they did catch Trump in Jeff Epstein's little honey trap. He certainly seems to roll over for Israel every time they want something more. And again, this idea of simply arbitrarily saying that Jewishness is now a nationality. Okay, that's like saying Christianity is a nationality. Or Hinduism is a nationality. For that matter, atheism is a nationality. Okay, what is the country of origin for all these new nationalities that are being created out of thin air? I don't think it really works out all that well. All righty. Let's talk about the economic news for a while. And the market is starting to stutter a little bit. I mean, Fox News was out there saying the market is climbing up and climbing up and climbing up. But the market has been rising for months on Trump's hot air about the Chinese trade deal coming soon. But it's becoming obvious there will be no such deal in the near future. Trump keeps making these pronouncements that we've got this deal, and then China comes back and says, no, we didn't agree to that, and you didn't agree to what we wanted. There is no deal yet. Still willing to talk. And of course, every time Trump comes on out and says there's a trade deal with China, the stock market soars. And then stock investors find out what's really going on. And it's a struggle to keep that market up there. But I'm sure the plunge protection team are working overtime right now. All right. The New York Federal Reserve plans to throw almost $3 trillion with a T at Wall Street's trading houses over the next month. Media is remaining silent. And one has to wonder how much money it will take before the corporate media, like the New York Times, reports to its readers on the biggest Wall Street bailout by the Fed since the financial crisis back in 2008. So last Thursday, the New York Fed announced that over the next month, it will shower the trading houses on Wall Street with a total of almost $3 trillion in short-term loans. And the money is for a Wall Street liquidity crisis that has yet to be explained in credible terms to the American people. And yet, the New York Times does not appear to have an investigative reporter assigned to investigate just really what's going on. Just 11 years after those same trading houses blew themselves up in the biggest financial crash since the Great Depression and took the U.S. economy along for a ride. And of course, what we're talking about here was the mortgage-backed security fraud, which is exactly what it was. Have they been engaging in more fraud since then? Probably. They do love their bubbles, because every time they create a bubble and the bubble bursts, they don't have to pay for it. And yes, it's true that AIG took it in the teeth back in 2008, but most of the rest of Wall Street, they got bailed out. There was the Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, followed by QE1, QE2, QE3, QE4, QE Infinity. Basically, Wall Street and the banking sector have created a huge mess with their debt-based currency, and all the government can think of doing is plundering the wealth of the American people and pouring it all over the banks to keep them going. Because apparently in the eyes of the United States government, bankers are far more important people than ordinary citizens. Seems to be the attitude that's out there. But the bottom line is that the neoliberal economics have destroyed the economy and the middle class. The latter part may have been deliberate, because it's from the middle class that opposition to oligarchy has always emerged during history, whether it was the American Revolution or the French Revolution. And they're basically cooking the books. And in order to try and get the GDP looking good, costs that are subtrahends from the GDP are not included in the measure. In fact, many of the costs are counted not as subtractions from the growth, but as additions. For example, the penalty interest on your credit card balance that results when you fall behind on your payments is counted as an increase in financial services, which results in an increase in gross domestic product. So the entire economic system is being turned upside down to keep it looking good. Okay, over in Santa Rosa, they have this homeless camp that is literally a mile-long tent city. California is struggling under the weight of 130,000 people living on the streets. And in Santa Rosa, what they're getting ready to try and do is move them onto some unused fairgrounds and just say, set your tent city up there as well. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court has refused to hear a lawsuit resulting from a decision from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that the homeless have a constitutional right to sleep in public places. Now, I've read that Constitution, and I don't see anything in there that says that. That's what the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals hath decreed, and the Supreme Court of the United States of America is refusing to challenge them on that. So, over in New York, the DMV offices are overwhelmed. On the first day, illegal immigrants are allowed to apply for driver's licenses, and the Department of Homeland Security is already out there saying this is a huge, huge mistake. You're letting these people just have driver's licenses. And of course, you know, New York has their version of motor voter, which means these illegal immigrants, when they apply for their driver's licenses, they're being automatically registered to vote, and they don't have to show ID indicating their citizenship. That's how the Democrats are going to steal next year. They're getting all these illegal immigrants into this country, something like what? It's coming up on 30 million now. They're going to get them all registered to vote and say, if you vote Democratic, we're going to take away stuff from all the legal American citizens and we're going to give it to you. It's bread and circuses, really what it's all about. Okay, getting on over to Great Britain, article out of Zero Hedge, who's afraid of Johnson's big Brexit win? And of course, it was a landslide victory. It was an embarrassment to those who obstructed Brexit for the last 3 years. And it was kind of fun watching Jo Swinson, leader of the Liberal Democrats, lose her seat after betting the entire party's future on revoking Article 50. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take a phone call from Tony in Puerto Rico. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Hey, Mike, man, you're looking good. You look like in the end it's been good to you. You're looking really, really, really well, really well. Very happy for you. Yeah, Mike, I was reading the other day, they're going to send a junk hauler out of space to pick up all the debris. Is out there?
Yes.
I mean, is it possible?
It's possible. I mean, they're looking obviously for the most cost-effective solution that they can. When I was still living in Hawaii, I was, trying to say, let's put a launch facility down on the Big Island. It's closer to the equator. It's going to cost less energy to get into orbit. The closer you are to the equator. And I'd even come up with a system to force the deorbit of junk. But I'm glad that somebody is finally taking this seriously because it's a mess up there. I mean, by treaty, new satellites now have the capacity to deorbit themselves and bring themselves back down. But there's a lot of stuff up there from before that treaty. I mean, there's stuff up there orbiting around going back to the Mercury and the Gemini space program. I think Ed White's glove is still up there floating around somewhere.
Okay, Mike, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Okay, and the phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. So we're talking about Great Britain. We're talking about the general election, which has sent shockwaves throughout the European Union, throughout the British political system, and presumably we're hearing shockwaves throughout the globalists and liberals in this country, who are realizing that maybe they don't have the lock on next year's election that they assumed that they did here. But apparently, there's one element of British society is overjoyed with the results of the election, and that's the British weapons manufacturers and their banks. Now, Great Britain is the world's 6th leading arms exporter, and 9 British companies make the list of the 100 largest military contractors in the world. And with the exception of Rolls-Royce, which is on hard times, the stock in all of these British manufacturers jumped upward following the results of the election. So they seem to feel that Boris Johnson, in addition to leaving the EU, is likely to bring about more wars. And of course, more wars are a good thing. Now, getting on back to Tony's phone call here, there is a new term that is starting to float around government circles. It's called astropolitics. And it has to do with the realization that space is becoming very crowded. It's being exploited by a lot of different countries, both commercially and militarily. And there's a lot of competing interests up there. We certainly saw how Starlink proved to be an inconvenience to scientists. And they're saying it's time to maybe have a formal government structure governing how space is being used. Good idea, depending upon who's put in charge. We got to take a break for station identification, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And over the last several years, we have seen the intrusiveness of the government into our private lives knoweth no bounds. And apparently the FBI is now after consumers' credit data, not just targeted individuals who are under suspicion for having done something. They want it all, so they can run it through their computers and look for anything they deem to be suspicious. So the FBI has secretly demanded access to a whole bunch of consumer data. Apparently, they're doing this through what are called the national security letters, which, by the way, there's nothing about that in the Constitution either. And basically, these national security letters supposedly compel these companies to turn over information to the FBI and at the same time have a gag order where the recipient is forbidden from discussing that they got the national security letter. So a lot of it is operating in the dark, as it were, and they're just out there fishing through your data, trying to find something they can prosecute you for. And interesting timing. Fox News is now running the story on how the FBI offered unsupported information to obtain the FISA warrants, which we already know. And again, they've got Comey out there saying, well, there was no malice intended. There was no bias out there. It was just sloppy, incompetent work. And if I were the president, I would say, all right, you're sloppy and incompetent. We'll forget about the idea of whether there was bias or anything, but you're all still fired anyway, just for being sloppy and incompetent, because you're supposed to be the FBI and you're supposed to be doing it a little bit better than anybody else. Now, we mentioned this a little bit earlier in the show, and I view this story with great alarm. Virginia lawmakers are preparing to pass this draconian gun control bill that would make most guns in the state illegal. And there's been a huge response to it. People are very angry about this. You have sheriffs who are out there saying, we're just going to deputize everybody so they are exempt from these laws. And apparently over in Tazewell County, they have formed an official active militia, basically going back to that Second Amendment to the Constitution, that in order to ensure the security of a free state, which Virginia sees itself as, that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So, to all those who like to mock gun owners and ask if they're going to fight tyranny in a militia, apparently Virginia's answer is, yeah, that's exactly what we're planning to do. And of course, the Virginia government is now talking about calling in the National Guard. The National Guard leadership is saying this is a completely inappropriate use of the National Guard. So again, the gun grabbers are pushing as hard and as fast as they can. They may have pushed too hard and too fast, and now people are really waking up. And as I was saying to that caller earlier in the program, I don't want to see a civil war break out in this country. But if one does, I'm optimistic, because conservatives, by and large, are the gun owners. Most of them have military experience. The liberals, on the other hand, they hate guns. They don't touch guns. They still can't figure out which bathrooms to use. And so I think probably that right there should convince cooler heads that maybe getting into an actual street battle with gun owners is not a good idea. Now, as you're probably aware, over in China, there's been a major problem with African swine fever that has just infected something like 1/3 of the entire stock of pigs in China. It's resulted in huge shortages. China is shopping around the world looking for pork because they're huge pork consumers. Well, apparently it has now come on out. This was not a natural occurrence here. Chinese criminal gangs have been flying drones over farms to infect perfectly healthy pigs with African swine fever. Then they go to the farms, they say, your pigs are sick, we'll buy them anyway for pennies on the dollar. Then they turn around and resell the meat from these infected pigs as perfectly healthy, according to SCMP. And that explains the rapid spread of the illness. What a monstrous, monstrous scheme that is. Talk about very, very evil minds at work here. Okay, going to take another phone call. Ken in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I got two things for you today. One, the FBI wanting your credit card data so they can pour through it to see what they could charge you with. Well, if they can't take your guns by, and that's the second thing is Virginia, if they can't take your guns by legislation, they're going to take it by charging you with a felony. So you can't have them. That's what I see going on there. And with Virginia, if, either the federal government or the state government wants to go this route that Virginia went with their state legislature, I could see this spreading like wildfire across the entire United States, where counties just say, yeah, we're gun-free, we're gun sanctuaries, and everybody's a deputy, and the militia gets a new rise, from any legitimate, so like back in the 90s when the Michigan State Police were targeting, militia members, they can't do that now because it's legitimate. It's a militia.
Yes. Well, do you remember it was a couple of years ago, they were trying to get this idea that anybody who was a military veteran was automatically presumed to be suffering PTSD and lost their Second Amendment rights. And that was clearly intended to disarm Americans with military experience, to basically get them off the playing field. That, unfortunately, didn't take hold.
Thank God, because we need those veterans.
Well, like I said, all joking aside, I don't want to see a civil war in this country. I don't want to see an armed revolution. I don't want to see blood in the streets. But it does feel like Washington, D.C. is not willing to back down. And at some point, yeah, somebody's going to start shooting. We're going to have Lexington and Concord all over again.
Right, but you're also looking at, there's 3,300 counties in the country. If you've got the majority of them are in, quote unquote red states. So if you've got 3,000 gun sanctuaries, and 300, gun-free counties, there really isn't going to be any shooting. I mean, it could spread like wildfire through the whole country, and the Supreme Court, whatever it's worth, could just say, yeah, it's legal.
Yeah, if you can ignore Title VIII, if you can ignore Title VIII by saying, well, we're a sanctuary city for illegal immigrants, then the liberals don't have any justification for opposing the idea of a sanctuary city for law-abiding gun owners.
Right, and that would totally, gun debate's over, because they don't have a leg to stand on. Because one is constitutional. So
well, I'd love for the gun debate to be over, but it's never going to be over because the gun grabbers, until they get what they want, they're going to keep trying to find ways to push their agenda. There are going to be more false flag mass shootings. We're going to see the demonization of guns and gun owners. They're going to try and pass more laws to limit the kind of weapons the American people are allowed to have. I mean, did you see the fuss they made over that Nerf gun? It's an assault-style Nerf gun. How dare they? And, I mean, it really has reached the point of ridiculousness. And it may surprise you to know, Gandhi favored private ownership of firearms. He said you should be polite with them. You shouldn't go out and do any bad thing with it. But he said, yeah, you gotta have guns if you're going to be free people.
Right. Well, here's another thing. If they try and pull false flags, mass shootings and whatnot, and let's say they try and pull it in a gun sanctuary. One, it's going to be, every citizen in the county, like in Virginia, what the one sheriff was talking about doing, every citizen in the county is a deputy. So if you're a deputy, you have arresting rights. You can arrest somebody, and you're carrying a weapon. So if you try and pull off a mass shooting, and there's people around watching it, everybody's armed, it's not going to fly. It's going to, like you say, I've heard you say millions of times, the government lies are usually clocked with egg timers.
Yeah, they really are here. And let's face it, they've botched They've botched so many of these false flag attacks, whether it was Sandy Hook or the Boston Marathon bombing. Again, the American people are not the naive, trusting people that they were back in the 50s and 60s. And I'm frankly not surprised at the reaction we're seeing from the gun owners of Virginia, where they're realizing the gun grabbers are serious. They want that Second Amendment to go away. They're already attacking the First Amendment, at least in regards to Israel. We don't have a legitimate government in this country anymore, because a legitimate government has to, constrain itself to that Constitution and that Bill of Rights. And this government is not doing that. Hence, they are not a legitimate government. It's just a criminal enterprise that has usurped power for its own benefits. And now they're afraid that the real world is catching up with them, and that's why they're desperate to take the guns away from the American people.
And I'm afraid, what I'm really afraid of is we just last year, 18, elected a Democrat governor of Michigan. So she's talking about gun control measures and this, that, and everything else. And I'm worried about she's going to try and do something like they've done in Virginia. That's, and then we're going to be right there with Virginia going, well, wait a minute, and seeing what's playing out in Virginia, playing out in Michigan. I don't want that.
Well, it's all about power and control, and that's why they're specifically obsessing about what they like to call assault rifles, and we like to call sporting rifles. Even though most crimes are committed with, disposable cheap Saturday night specials, and the fact that, doctors are killing more people than assault rifles, but nobody talks about getting rid of doctors. It's all about disarming the American people so they will do what they're told to do.
Yeah. Yep, that's about it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network, and we're going to take another phone call from Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I've got two topics, and if you can hold me over if I have to on the second one. But the second one's going to be gun control in Virginia and so on. But the first is, you were talking about those national security letters and so on. Those have been around since the Patriot Act was passed in 2001. And to give you an idea of what they can do about illegal search and seizure and under the terrorist provisions of the Patriot Act, they can go to without a warrant. They can, of course, feds or whoever can toss your house. Don't have to tell you. You come home, looks like you've been robbed or something, and probably you have. But it turns out it might have been the feds, but you don't know who it is, even, right? They don't even have to tell you they've been there. They can go to your priest. They can go to your psychiatrist. They can go to your tax attorney or your attorney. They can go to anybody, and they can say, "Give me your accountant." They can say, "Give me everything you have on Mike." And and the guy says no, and he says, "Well, you're subject to something like 5 years in jail if you refuse." And by the way, if you tell Mike that I've been here and we've got all his psychiatric records and all his financial records and all his stuff from his doctor or whatever, if you even let on that we were here to anybody, you'll be subject to a 5-year jail sentence. So you don't even know this is happening to you. So
it's a real Gestapo tactic.
Mike, that's been on since 2003. They've been doing that since 2001 actually. So it's really bad, and they can turn the power of the state on you in a big way. And the main reason I wanted to call was what you were just talking about the thing in Virginia and the gun control. Yes. And how this might be the crystallization of really something bad or something good. But I would tell you that I'm not optimistic about it, because they're the same people who have enough money and enough clout to get more than half the states to turn their back on our First Amendment rights on behalf of Israel, right? We surrendered our First Amendment in all the state legislatures, and by the way, the feds want to do it too. And of course, they'll take money just as quick as any state legislator will. They want the guns. They'll look at the people behind this gun grabbing thing. They're all, no, they're not all, but they're primarily led by the basically by Zionist Jews, frankly. At any rate, Bloomberg being primary, he just like ponied up $100 million of his own money. But let's say, for instance, that they do what they did, the militias and all that, they do what they did in a little larger scale in Virginia, the same thing that they did with what's his name's ranch in Vegas, outside Vegas.
Yes,
the Bundy Ranch. And the militias came, and the only reason they didn't, frankly, kill Bundy was because other people were lined up to shoot back at them. And remember, I want to harken back to 2008 when they found internal memorandum in the FBI when they were openly discussing in interoffice memos, the Dallas FBI was, about opening fire with snipers on the leadership of the unarmed Occupy Wall Street movement. Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that one.
So these guys have absolutely no compunction about opening fire, and when they can't do a Cliven Bundy because people back him up, what they do is Lavoy Finicum, where they get him off on his own and they just murder him. Well, what will happen is they will not have a big confrontation, obviously, with the militia. That would be catastrophic for the governor and the people who voted this in. And so they'll back off and wait till they diffuse and go home, right? And then they'll pick off the leaders, arrest them one at a time, and so on. The big thing, though, is that they'll use all the apparatus of you-know-whose apparatus, all the press, all the TV, all the movies, all the TV stations, everything. And they'll say, and they'll equate the militias and gun ownership with white supremacy. And they'll say, these are white supremacist, neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic guys. They'll make all those, they'll connect all those dots.
They tried to do that with that kosher market shooting. And people were already out there, tweeting, this is what white supremacy does. And then somebody said, the shooters in this case were black, and everybody was taking their tweets down. The fact of the matter is that corporate media isn't getting the traction with the American people it used to. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing this gelling of resistance in Virginia, is because the people of Virginia, they're not buying what they see on TV about guns are bad and gun owners are crazy and all the rest of it. And Virginia, of course, has got a rich tradition as a shooting state, gun state, hunting state. And so, yeah, my concern, of course, is that if something were to break out, it could spread across the country.
Mike, it's the state of Patrick Henry as well. Can you hold me for?
Yeah, I'm going to hold you over. Don't hang up, and we'll be right back with Peter, and we've got another caller waiting on the line, so stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Peter in Los Angeles about gun control. And at this point, it's very obvious that the false flags aren't working, that they can't trick the American people into surrendering their weapons. In fact, the more the government lies to us about Assad's sarin gas and Saddam's nuclear weapons and everything, I think the more people are hanging onto their guns. These buyback programs aren't really working. In fact, they're actually encouraging theft, because people will go steal a gun from a relative and turn it in for, the cash reward or the bag of groceries or whatever is being offered. And every time you get a gun grabber out there screaming about how the American people must be disarmed, gun sales go through the roof. So the only way the gun grabbers are going to get what they want is some kind of transformative event where there's a declared state of national emergency, and they'd simply come on out and say, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is suspended, and we're going to start sending soldiers door to door to grab the guns. Now, that even of itself may prove to be problematic, because some years ago, there was what was called the Combat Arms Survey administered to Marines, who are exempt from posse comitatus, and it asked point blank, would you be willing to kill American citizens who refuse to surrender their guns to the government? And the response on the combat arms survey was, for the most part, in the affirmative, yes, we would be willing. But I had one of those Marines I was doing business with, and he said, basically we said the affirmative on the combat arms survey because that was clearly what the officers wanted us to say. And he said, the reality is that your Marines are not going to fire on American citizens just for wanting to hold on to their legally owned firearms. But, we could see something like that happen in this country, where they say, there's a terrorist cell out there, or they've got this or they've got that, and, start turning in your guns. And as somebody else once said, they'll just use snipers to pick off the leaders of the resistance, which is why we need to have a leaderless resistance if we're going to be effective.
Well, Mike, again, this, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to our Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, search and seizure, privacy, everything else, they're already turning their back on it. They're absolutely unconcerned with the constitutional law. What we do know, however, is that every one of these guys in the states, the governors, the legislatures, and the feds, the Senate and the House, and the presidency itself, and the courts, they're up for sale. They are for sale. And we have a bunch of people who can print money out of nothing, who are taking away our very basic First Amendment rights so they can't be criticized. And they're not going to stop at this. And one important point is they don't need to have Marines to say they won't open fire. They have drones. And all you need is a couple of sociopaths sitting in Nellis Air Force Base that can control 50 drones and wipe these guys out at leisure. And they don't need to be tethered at all to legality or morality or worry about the loyalty of the Army or the Navy or whatever it is, because they don't need them anymore.
Yep.
That's the one thing that technology has now snipped. Even the most heinous regimes in the past have always had to at least tailor their policies so that they weren't completely repugnant to the Army because the Army kept them in power. They don't need that anymore. But at any rate, these guys own, they can print the money. They own all the legislatures. They own the courts. And they're going to paint this as a supremacy thing that I told you about. They'll make sure that this is a complete issue. It will be portrayed that way every way. And that's how they'll come back at them. But that's just, what do you think about that?
Well, I know that they're not going to give up their agenda to disarm the American people. I know that they're willing to break all the rules and do anything it takes to get what they want. We're already seeing, groups like Antifa are openly resorting to violence in the streets to try and push their agenda through. We're seeing that in Great Britain ever since the Tories won that election. Antifa is now rioting all across the country. It's real brown shirt stuff. And I think we're seeing the entire world heading into a period of prolonged crisis between liberalism, let's control it all, versus other people who just say, just leave me alone. Let me do what I do. Yeah. Let me take care of my family and just otherwise leave me alone. Unfortunately, liberalism's entire political philosophy is they have to be in control of absolutely every aspect of your life because they're absolutely convinced they can re-engineer your mind if they do that.
Mike, it's not just liberalism wants to control that. But I will also say, look at the threads you can draw between Jesse Smollett, which was of course aimed at making it look like it was somebody who it was not. This latest thing you said about that deli in Brooklyn, which was aimed at making people look bad, and all of that. If they control the media, and there's no follow-up, there's no consequences. That's what happens.
Yeah, that's what happened. All right, Peter, we're going to let you go. We got to take some more commercials. We got another caller waiting on the line. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones to Kelly in Austin. Aloha, Kelly. Thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind today?
Certainly, that was another very good call from Peter. I always enjoy hearing his comments. I think they're very incisive and insightful. So I encourage Peter to call in as often as he can, because I'm sure that many of your listeners enjoy hearing what he has to say. Lately, I've been listening to a lot of your callers who are encouraging supporters of Donald Trump to find somebody else to support other than Trump in 2020. And to me, that's nothing more than a recipe for disaster, because they can't find anybody within the Republican Party or anywhere else in this country who's going to do anything but lose to the Democrats. And that will give Democrats control of government, which is exactly what Democrats want. I'm upset about some of the things that they've called about as well. But my point here is that I'm willing to give Trump another 4 years because we can't afford to give Democrats control for even a day down the road. It's important that we do what would happen in Britain, and that is wipe these people from the field, take control of government, and then push this and push government for where we know it needs to be. This country towards where it needs to be. I think we can work within the Republican Party to reform things and to purge many of the rhinos from within its midst who are no better than the Democrats who are trying to undermine Trump. So when you look at things where things stand now, yes, it might sound noble to encourage somebody to find somebody else to support other than Donald Trump. But be wary, because if these people think things are bad now, how bad will things be? How loudly will they scream and howl when they wake up and find out that Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or some other left-wing freak is sitting in the White House, and the Senate and the House of Representatives are both in control of the Democrat Party? Do you really want that? Do you really want to risk that? I think it's worth giving Trump another 4 years to work with him, and after that, we'll see what happens. But we cannot risk allowing Democrats to take control of this government again. We have got to run them out of office and then take control of government and push this country to where it needs to be.
Well, you make a lot of good sense here. And of course, there is the other aspect that Trump in his second term isn't going to owe anybody any favors. He's not going to feel obligated to please his backers and controllers because they can't help him win a third term. And I know every second term president is always talking about, oh, gee, if only I could have a third term. It's not going to happen. And so Trump in his second term would be under a lot less of these constraints he's getting from people like Sheldon Adelson. But you're absolutely right. There's really nobody else to turn to on the GOP side. And right now, again, they just ran a poll. Trump is polling ahead of every single one of the Democrat candidates who are out there.
That's got to make Nancy Pelosi and that idiot Adam Schiff and that Jew Schumer angry as hell.
Along with Hillary Clinton, because I'm convinced that she's trying to find some way where she can insert herself into next year's race, whether it's going to be a brokered convention or who knows what's going to happen. But when you look at some of the underhanded stuff they did during the primary season in 2016, anything is possible at this point. In fact, I'm still very concerned that if the Senate does not remove Trump from office, and I don't think they're going to do that, that the next step will be for the deep state to try and just assassinate him directly. Put Pence in the Oval Office, because the Democrats can roll right over Pence in the next year's elections.
I think you're correct there. I don't think the Senate is going to remove Trump, period. I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell that will happen. But I think the deep state, if its back is pushed to the wall, will do to Trump what it did to John F. Kennedy.
Yes.
And that was obviously a deep state operation. And the government here, the deep staters, have proved time and again that they're willing to resort to assassination and anything else they can resort to in order to maintain control, a death grip on this country. Many of those people,
not just
if
this
they can be
country, the
identified
world. I
as
mean,
brought to justice.
look how they're rioting
Right.
all over Great Britain. To heck with what the voters want. We liberals, we know what's best for all the rest of you, and we know that you have the freedom to use any bathroom that you want to use, and Common Core is good for our kids, and we know what's best. So stop trying to vote for anybody but us, because you're being a stooge for Vladimir Putin. If in point of fact you refuse to go along with us.
Mm-hmm. You've heard that sentiment expressed by the media before, by the so-called
Yes.
mainstream media. I've heard it more than once. The one who comes to mind is that idiot Chris Cuomo, who said something to that effect. And also, you've had others who said, "Well, it's the job of the media to form public opinion." No, the role of the media is to report and to inform.
Well, that's its original purpose, but the media has been co-opted. I mean, during World War II, our government was looking at the amazing job that the Nazis did by controlling their media. I mean, they even went so far as to make radios available to the German people for virtually no cost, but the radios could only tune in the sanctioned German radio stations. So they couldn't hear anything coming from any other countries.
Well, yes, but Herr Goebbels was a master propagandist. I think he runs rings around some of the people in this government today.
I don't know. I mean, if Goebbels had access to the technology that our people do, and I'll grant you, some of our people in the intelligence community are real goofballs, and they do some really stupid things, which is why we keep finding out about what they're doing. But yeah, it's the new technology has given this government incredible power to intrude into our private lives and to just exercise control over us. And it really is very, very dangerous. I'm more afraid of the government's computers than I am of the government's guns.
Oh, I am too. And I heard your report today about the FBI wanting access to our credit records and our financial transactions. That's an example of a state, a deep state operation run amok.
Well, it's a police state.
Who are pushing that, the people who are pushing that have got to be hauled in and frankly hanged. We can't have that in this country. My last comment here is that with regard to the gun control issue in Virginia, I was pleased to hear that at least one county in Virginia was thinking about or had authorized the formation of a countywide militia.
Yes,
and I think that's an idea that can catch on. Of course, that would obviously get a lot of flack from the state legislatures and legislators. But I think that's actually a way to confront this matter, to let the politicians in the state capitals of this country know that they have gone way too far.
I think there's something like 70 counties in Virginia that have already declared themselves gun rights sanctuaries. And I don't like the word confrontation. It really comes down to how far are the gun grabbers willing to go to achieve their agenda. And as one of our earlier callers said, we know that they're willing to use snipers to take out the leadership of anybody who has the effrontery to stand up and say to the government, you're wrong. And as long as you refuse to comply with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, you are not a legitimate government.
Yes, I read something on the web today. It was on Gab, but it was linked to something else, and so I looked it up on other sources and found it on more than one source. But apparently, the governor of Virginia is reported to have been considering ways to cut off the electricity, internet, phone service, anything else to the counties in Virginia that have declared themselves sanctuary counties. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but it sounds like something that a desperate Democrat might do.
Yeah, it does sound like an act of desperation. And again, this could result in legal actions. But if they get it up to the Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that the Second Amendment does represent an individual right to keep and bear arms. And the purpose of the Second Amendment is to allow the American people to have a force of arms to match those in the hands of the government itself, to hold abusive government at bay. And it may come down to that. And I don't want to see that. But at this point, it looks like, again, how far is the government, how far are the gun grabbers willing to go to achieve their ends? They've been trying to do it with propaganda and deception. It's not working. They're not getting the traction any longer. Every time they start screaming about disarming the American people go out and buy more guns.
Well, don't underestimate their resolve to do something. I'm 68 years old. I'm a very youngish 68-year-old guy. Man, I don't want to see, confrontation. But if push comes to shove, I won't hesitate to pull out one of the 25 firearms in my gun safe here and become affiliated with a militia. I'm very capable of using my gun. I know my guns inside and out. And there are many other people out here like me in Texas who will not hesitate to step forward with our own firearms, our own ammunition, along with other people to stop a tyrannical government from running amok.
Well, they're already running pretty much amok, and
they are.
They're trying to boil the frog slowly, but I think in Virginia they turned up the heat just a little too quickly, a little too fast.
Well, they did, but I tell you what, it caught the attention of many millions of people across the country.
Yes, they did.
And so I would expect that there are people that there are many millions of people in other states who are having discussions about doing in their states what is being done in the sanctuary counties in Virginia, not only declaring themselves sanctuary counties, but possibly even forming countywide militias to keep government agents from operating within their counties and to keep the National Guard out. So I can't imagine the National Guard anyway embracing any of this nonsense. I read a comment from the National Guard commandant, or whatever you call him, in Virginia, and he didn't sound as though he was very enthusiastic.
He did not sound enthusiastic about that. But I'll tell you, for that one county that's already organizing its own formal militia, you need to basically tap whoever's in your county that has military experience and start thinking about a guerrilla war, because you'd be insane to go head-to-head against U.S. Army regulars. And just think about, how are you going to take down those drones overhead? How are you going to mess up their communications and their internet? And start laying those plans now.
That's absolutely the only way you can fight this is with guerrilla warfare.
Yes.
Look how effective guerrilla warfare was in Vietnam. Look how effective guerrilla warfare is been in Afghanistan and in other countries. You have countries with powerful armies that are just held at a standstill because they're being confronted by people who are fighting guerrilla tactics. That's what the Americans did during the Revolutionary War. They fought guerrilla warfare. They used guerrilla tactics against the Brits, and the Brits complained because they said, "Oh, well, this isn't cricket. You should come out and stand out in the open so we can fire at you." And the Americans said, "Screw you."
That's really what it came on down to. And the fact of the matter is, there's also one other factor you need to keep in mind. Okay, the American people, the gun owners, are going to be fighting for their homes and loved ones that they can just look at and see. And that's going to give them a tremendous psychological advantage over whatever mercenary forces are sent in against them. That's also worked against Britain in the American Revolution. The American colonists were fighting for their homes and families and businesses. The Brits were just there for a paycheck.
Which Japanese officer was it who said early on in the war that Japan had no hope of invading the United States? He said because there would be a firearm behind every blade of grass or behind every tree? Even our own army would have to consider.
It was either Yamamoto or Hirohito.
It might have been. I'm not sure who it was. I've read that comment more than once, but it was very telling. And I think it applies today as much as it applied back then. It wouldn't take that long for many people, for militias organized within states to mount an effective resistance against any kind of armed government assault on people. You have to consider as well that many people who are in the military, whether it's National Guard or regular Army or whatever else, are not sympathetic to this at all. And I can't imagine a soldier who has sworn to uphold the Constitution of the United States against enemies foreign and domestic will consider firing upon American citizens as an obligation he has to carry out at the orders of a president. Any president who orders that against his own people should be hauled out and hanged. Any politician who supports that should be hanged. There is no excuse for that. And unfortunately, I think in this country today, you have too many people, most of them, probably 95% of them Democrats, who wouldn't hesitate to do that if given the chance.
Yes.
Well, this has been a good program today, Mike. And again, I want to reiterate how much I enjoy hearing Peter's comments. Peter, please call in again. I always enjoy hearing what you have to say. And,
okay. Well, remember, we are back to we're back to enforcing the one call per caller per day, and Peter's had his call for today, so we'll have to wait till tomorrow to hear more of his wisdom.
I mean, calling again when he can tomorrow or the day after, because I think his comments are always really well thought out. Good show, Mike.
Okay. I'm just looking at this spot that's running on Fox News about dial this 800 number and show that you support President Trump. Okay, so we're going to take a quick commercial. We're going to be back here with the last segment of our program today after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. And over at Google, somebody noticed that when you run a search for this Chinese performing arts company called Shen Yun, instead of getting information about the performing arts company, you are shuttled over to Chinese government propaganda attacking this performing arts group. And whether Google is just being paid by the Chinese government to do this, or they have some reason, other reason, it's obvious you're not getting it. Other search engines do not show this behavior. And this sort of ties in with something else that I've noticed. Google is no longer a web search engine. It's an ad search engine. No matter what you put into Google that you're searching for, the first page is going to be nothing but advertisements for companies that are selling something they think might be associated with your search term. And they really have made themselves not very useful, and that's why you should be seriously looking at other search engines like DuckDuckGo. All right, Visa is warning holiday travelers to be wary of hackers using self-service gas station kiosks to steal your credit card information. And apparently they're able now to do this with emails that infect the gas station's computers. They don't even have to put that little extra shell on the outside of the gas station. This one is just a little sick. The Epilepsy Foundation has been hit in a mass strobe cyber attack. Hackers sent images of flashing strobe lights to the foundation's thousands of Twitter followers in several attacks. Now, this, of course, if you have epilepsy, flashing lights can set off a seizure. In fact, one of the things that was always very frustrating for me, growing up in the animation and visual effects industry, is how many times I had to tell people, no, you cannot pulse this light at 3 per second. You'll set off all the epileptics. And why they don't actually teach that in film and animation school, I don't know. But there have been some bad situations where Japanese anime has flashing lights, and it's affected children watching the show. But apparently these hackers are doing this deliberately. They're sending out these messages to all these people who are epileptic and throwing them into seizures, and nobody knows if any people have actually been killed by this, but it's a stupid thing to do. It's very, very deadly. Okay, I've just been informed by our control room that John Stadmiller has two important guests today concerning agriculture and Agenda 21. He's going to have Tom DeWeese and Vincent Finelli, and they're going to be talking about, actually, I think it's Agenda 30 now. They had to sort of back off the date because they're not making a lot of progress. But this is all coming down from the United Nations, which is fully on board with this one world government because they think it's going to be them. But according to sources I have inside the UN itself, they're more corrupt than any other government you're going to see on Earth. By the way, speaking of corrupt, well, I'm going to hold it off until tomorrow because there's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller with Tom DeWeese and Vincent Finelli. I'm sure they're going to have a lot of interesting things for you to think about. Please spread the word of RBN. Spread the word of whatreallyhappened.com. Please think about putting something in our Christmas stocking this year because we've been good little girls and boys. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.